Well, oil's surely a major issue. Venezuela's been, after all, the U.S. kicked Britain out of Venezuela 80 years ago under Wilson, just at the point when and the U.S. wasn't a big global power at that time. It usually was stuck around the Caribbean, but the first big move in the Western Hemisphere was Venezuela, and they got rid of the British because they knew it was going to be an oil producer. I mean, and then the U.S. was by far the main oil producer, but they're thinking ahead. And that continues. I mean, Venezuela remains, since around 1970, it's been the primary source for external support for oil. And yeah, Colombia's got substantial resources. You know, it's not Venezuela or Saudi Arabia, but it's kind of like Central Asia. You know, it's significant. And the same is true of Brazil. They're counting on Brazilian oil and possibly Ecuador. And you know, there's no doubt that that's an issue. How big an issue you can argue, but you look at the funding. I mean, you know better than I do, so I don't have to tell you. But the funding, a lot of it goes to protecting the oil pipelines. You know, just training forces to protect the pipelines. As far as that's a big piece of the potential oil resources, and not just oil, but everything else too. I mean, you know, gold, emeralds, you know, there's all kind of resources there. Actually, the place where I was, we corresponded about this in Cauca in the south. Part of the reason for driving the peasants out is because of doesn't have to be oil there, but there's just other resources, including coal, incidentally. If you drive the peasants out of the mountains, you can strip mine the mountains. And you know, apparently the coal's very high quality. And like right around Boston, my daughter happens to be she's a Latin Americanist who, kind of political activist who works on, she's now working mostly on Columbia, but where she teaches in a working class college near Boston, they've set up a sister city project. She's set up a sister city project between the town and part of Columbia, Guajira, because that's the source for the coal that's used for a highly polluting power plant in the town where she lives, and everybody hates the power plant, so that was a way to organize people in a poor working class town. But I'll think about international affairs for Columbia Support Committee, which worked out pretty well. So there's this kind of thing going on. And as far as the counter-hegemonic bloc is concerned, it's got to be a big issue in the planning sections in the U.S. They're surely upset about it. And you can see what happened in Brazil. You know, they very quickly, even before the election, they made sure that Lula is not going to be able to follow the the decision of the Democratic vote. I mean, they were right away, before the election, there was a big attack on the real, you know, it went way down. The interest rates had to shoot astronomically high, growth stops, capital flows out of the country. I mean, that's the main point of neoliberalism. Now, the main point of it doesn't do anything for the economy, it probably harms it, even harms profits, but it does undermine democracy. It's a terrific tool for undermining democracy. That was understood by Keynes and White back in 1945. That's why the Bretton Woods system was based on capital control, because they understood that there's no other way to allow governments to pursue social democratic policies. Support for them was enormous at the time. So yeah, and that led to a huge period of great economic growth, the best in history, and also welfare state programs around much of the world, you know, with egalitarian growth. In the early 70s, when they dismantled that system, it was completely understood that this is simply going to reverse the process. It'll undermine the threat of democratic governments. And you can see it playing out in Brazil just dramatically. I mean, the big democratic majority, you know, committed president, decent guy. He's right back following the Cardozo programs, and you can't blame him. There's nothing much else he could do except declare a revolution or something. And at the same's happening in Venezuela, as they're moving right onto a military coup. 40 years from now, we may get some documents saying that, you know, the U.S. is sponsoring a military coup, but you can just see it playing out in the streets day after day. Ecuador has a major U.S. military base now. It's been put in sort of quietly, but it's there. Peru is going to be the same. Argentina, I don't know what they're going to do with Argentina. It's kind of, you know, there's a lot of popular organizing going on there, on takeover of plants, building up a kind of a popular economy. I don't know where it'll go, but it's got to be a concern that from Argentina up to Venezuela, there's extreme unrest. And, I mean, it's kind of interesting to compare it with, say, 40 years ago. So when Brazil did have a populist president back in the early 60s, Goulart. And at that time, the technique for stopping it was just a military coup. So Kennedy and Johnson administrations carried out a military coup. That was the first big national security state in Latin America. This time they don't have to do that. First of all, they probably can't because the military probably couldn't do it, but they also don't have to because Clinton provided them with the techniques of control, namely neoliberal financial liberalization and privatization. And that's enough, I mean, unless there's a real revolution. So the effects of these programs, you know, people have talked about a lot about the popular movements have talked, like here, you know, have talked about the economic effects, which are real. You know, it does harm people, it destroys the environment and so on, but the main effect is just to undermine democracy. It eliminates the possibility of democratic choices.